Hey, what's up everyone? My name is Achil Prabhat Rudolph. I'm a social confidence coach and I help South Asian origin men build the kind of confidence that is necessary to go out there into the real world and attract the right partner for a long-lasting relationship here in the West without dating apps. And in this video today, I'm going to talk about a very severe but yet shockingly common problem for Indian men living abroad. And that is that they often struggle with their Indian part of their identity. And I had this problem myself. Based on the feedback that Indian men get from the world in their real life, but especially online, they often end up feeling inferior, and that obviously creates all kinds of problems for the immigration process and even for the societies that they end up in. And in this video, we will dissect this very complex and very sensitive issue, and then I will offer a 3-step solution for this problem. Every day I get messages from clients or people online who tell me something like this. Thirsty North Indian international students ruined our reputation by harassing women and bringing shame to our race. I will always be seen as a potential rapist no matter what I do. And then people often also just give up on talking to women because they think that they don't want to be part of the problem of brown and black creeps and end up on TikTok. So there's a pattern here. Often what happens is that you see a weakness or a misbehavior, bad agents in the Indian immigrant community. There might be someone who just does a really creepy approach, or even actual criminals, rapists, child molesters. There might be someone just using abusive language or littering or not having good body hygiene. And all of that then gets amplified by social media, where you obviously get the racist comments from idiots online. And all of that together leads to often us Indian men feeling ashamed of our ethnic origin, and then even scared of other people putting us into the same category as what we see in these extreme cases. And that can lead to extremely traumatizing situations. I mean, a story of a guy comes to my mind where he was dating a woman and it went well, and abruptly, after 3 or 4 dates, she suddenly broke it off and said, "I can't see you anymore." And he asked why, what happened? And she said she watched a Netflix documentary about rape in New Delhi. And this guy happened to be from New Delhi. And so now she said he reminded her of that, and she suddenly didn't like the way he looked at her anymore. Now, there's 2 kinds of responses that I see with Indian men living abroad to this kind of dark reality. And the one is just to say, I don't want to have anything to do with Indians anymore. I want to disavow that identity. If there was one thing that I could change, I would change the fact that I'm Indian. And that obviously means that you're not comfortable with yourself. That means you're not at peace with yourself, which then makes you very unattractive. Or the other response, often I also see that one, is to get into this victim mindset where you just give up completely and you say, okay, I can't solve this problem. It's something that is completely dependent on external factors or on factors of my identity that I just can't change, like my skin color. And then they completely abdicate the responsibility to even change anything about their situation. And they would just assume that someone with their phenotype cannot even have success. I get a message like this one here. I'm just an ugly, dark-skinned Indian manlet, and there's no amount of hard work or money that can compensate for my inferior genes. If you have this kind of mindset, it's a clear indicator that you are not really going to go far in life. You're not going to reach any big goals with this kind of attitude. So again, you end up in this self-perpetuating spiral that makes you even more unattractive and unpleasant to be around. Now, this is a very dire situation that many, many Indian men, I'm not sure if I want to say most, but many, many Indian men who live abroad are in. At the same time, what I want to do in this video is to help you break out and find a very clear path for how to not be in that same boat like most other people that you might have in your environment. And you can be the exception. That's the bottom line of this video. But in order to be the exception, you obviously have to do exceptional stuff. You have to do stuff that these other people that you see suffering are not doing. And so here I want to really invite you to log into this video and watch it till the end. That's one thing that most people don't do. Here you can prove that you're the exception. You're the person who actually wants help and is willing to take it up from someone who has thought through it through many, many years of experience and countless conversations with my own clients solving these problems. And so this is going to be a bit of a long and tricky video. It's one of the most difficult videos that I've ever made, hands down. But I invite you to stay and actually listen to the solution that I laid out here. And this solution has really 3 parts. And the first part of the solution that I propose is to stop over-identifying. To stop over-identifying with this one national or ethnic group that you're part of. As humans, we are part of many, many groups. We are maybe Indians, maybe Germans, maybe tall, maybe engineers. And just because someone in one of the groups that we are in misbehaves should not make us feel ashamed to be part of that group. And especially if it's a group that we didn't even choose. If it's a group that was just assigned to us by birth. And just to make this more clear, let's take an example. It's a statistical fact that black-skinned people in the world tend to be poorer than white-skinned people. But everyone knows and understands at this point that it's not the skin color that actually causes the poverty. There are some pretty screwed up mechanisms in history, and those are problems that need to be addressed that led to black skin color people having less economic resources. And just because being part of a certain group is statistically associated with a bad outcome, it's not something to be ashamed of. It's rather something to be aware of, something to fight, something to understand and then to eradicate. And so when you get triggered just because someone from your group did something bad, like someone in your group is a child molester or rapist, and immediately you're worried that you're also a child molester or a rapist just because you're Indian and that person is Indian, well, that means you're really subscribing to a very simplistic model of the world where all members of one group behave the same. And that might be actually a rule of thumb that other people will start projecting onto the group as a way of discriminating or putting that group down. But you as a member of the group should not obviously subscribe to that simplistic worldview. That is what I mean by over-identification, which then leads to internalized racism. You're not necessarily to blame for this. There is a lot of forces in the world that actually support this kind of over-identification. Oftentimes it is created by political movements because often politicians will try to highlight the superiority of a group and strengthen the group identity and make it seem like everyone in this group does the same thing because they want to rally that group potentially against another group. This happens a lot in recent Indian politics. We have to kind of transcend that and break out of that. We have to consciously counteract those tendencies and access deeper layers of our identity. And of course, there are many other groups that we are part of, and we can easily access that and realize that those layers of identity are more important. It's probably more important for you as an entity, as a being, that you are a man rather than just an Indian. It's probably more important as well that you are a human. That's another group identity that you could focus on. But as I said, a lot of social forces will draw you away from those deeper connecting identities towards the narrow, superficial identities. Not over-identifying means identifying more with the deeper layers where we are all part of the same boat, and not identifying too much with those superficial layers that are often projected on top of us. And the deeper you go in that layers of identity, the more obvious it becomes and the more ridiculous it becomes when someone holds you responsible for something that someone else in your group did, right? If another man does shitty things, which happened in the past a lot, it doesn't mean that you should be ashamed of being a man. There are problems that men face and that men have caused, and it's important to work on them, but that doesn't mean you need to disavow your identity as a man. Similarly, humans have done horrendous stuff, heinous, absolutely cruel acts, right? Humans have devised killing machines. They have committed crimes against humanity. They have committed the Holocaust. That doesn't mean we should be ashamed of being a human. And so that is the first step of the solution that I propose here. Stop identifying too much with a superficial layer of identity. Then I want to move on to the second part of the solution, and that is assuming the best in other people. What I mean by this is, once you've made it clear to yourself in your mind by really understanding what I just said in the first pillar, that it's absolutely ridiculous to just group people and say they're all behaving according to the same rules. Once you really watch that part and you really understand that, you can really eradicate those stereotypes from your own mind, from your own thinking. Once you actually remove racism from how you see the world, from the lens that you look at the world at, you will realize that generally people, and this might be very hard to swallow for you, people are generally not racist. There's very little racism, actually, when you look around in the Western world at this point. And this is a mindset that I have built. It's not something that I had always. So I'll tell you a story later where I still had a very different mindset. But at this point, when I talk to someone, I consider it pretty much unimaginable that they might be racist. Like, why? Why would you put me into the same category as some rapist just because we share the same tone of the skin pigment? That's a scandal for me. Like, there might be some crazy people who actually have this going on in their mind, but that's the absolute exception. And when I find someone like that, I just immediately end the conversation. I run away. And so by assuming that most people would never have some ridiculous thought processes like this, by not assuming racism, but rather assuming that people are pretty fair, I then minimize the chance that they will actually display any negative behaviors towards me, which I could perceive as racist, because they will not feel that fear that I would carry in if I was to assume that they're racist. And they will not feel like I'm being hostile. They will not feel like I'm fearful. And so they will be nice to me, and then I will literally never run into situations where I could assume that someone did something bad to me because they're racist, because basically no one does anything bad to me anyways. On the other side, if you actually assume that people are racist and that they might put you into the category of other bad people because of your race, what you really do is you functionally admit that it's conceivable that you might be in that category. Because otherwise, why would normal people believe that? If it was completely ridiculous, then you wouldn't be scared of it. So as long as you really have that fear of people putting you into a box, you will be put into a box. And I made another video about this topic, an adjacent topic, where I said, whenever you have the fear, and as long as you have the fear of being perceived as a creepy immigrant, you will be a creepy immigrant. There's a link to that video if you want to check that out. Now, this is a very subtle point, and I want to offer an example to illustrate how this plays out and what are the implications, how you can change your behavior. There was a client, and he went to a road trip, and he told me, he came back, he said it was a great trip. I asked him how was the nightlife. He said it was great, but there was this one racist incident. And of course I was all ears. I said, what happened? Tell me about the details. And he said, well, there was a group of women that he wanted to talk to, and they were in a bar, and he went inside the bar and sat down next to the women and started talking to them. And then the bartender, or the waitress, she came, and she was a bit upset because this guy, he didn't order anything and didn't look like he was going to order anything. And then when pointed out, or when reprimanded for this, he actually ordered a water and a bowl of chips. And so the waiter got pretty angry and started kind of kicking him out. You see, it is quite possible that this woman would have responded the exact same way to someone who is white. Like, she has good reason to be angry at someone who comes into the bar and doesn't actually comply with the implicit contract of a bar, which is, if you want to socialize there, you also have to consume there. But the fact that he told this story and labeled it as a racist incident shows his worldview. It shows that he expects a lot of racism in the world going around. And I had the same problem myself, actually, growing up here in Germany as a brown-skinned man with Indian roots. I often ran into these issues where I would talk to someone in the administration or the insurance or electricity company, all these government type jobs, or conductors of bus, and they would be very rude to me. And I always said, wow, why are they so rude? It must be because of my skin color. And oftentimes I was even like scared to even go to these places, and scared and nervous to talk to these authority figures. And then it just got worse. And I just recently had this moment of clarity, because as someone who grew up here, I have the advantage that I know the language very well. I know German perfectly. So I had a phone call with one of these peoples, like a landlord or something. And on the phone, when I was speaking perfect German, I sensed the same rudeness that triggered that same response. But then I said, wait a second, they can't know that I'm brown. I speak perfect German and they're still rude. And that made me realize that that's just the culture of Berlin. Mind you, I grew up here, but still, I had this misconception and I had to learn this. One of the main reasons that we still believe that racism is so common and so many people are racist is really what we see in social media. That's the place where racism is amplified. That's the place where racist stuff actually gets promoted, because it triggers us so deeply, and it polarizes, and it makes people go insane. And that's what social media thrives on, right? It loves conflict. And so when you see a lot of racist content on your feed, well, then you start believing that there are a lot of racists around. And then you, well, expect racism wherever you go. So the solution here, it really entails getting off of social media, especially as an Indian man. I would say as any man who has ambitious goals and where his goals do not absolutely require using social media, you have no business whatsoever wasting your time on Instagram. And of course, this is difficult because social media can give you that feeling that even though you're not really having a lot of social life, you actually feel connected. And it also gives you the illusion that maybe that is the path, that is the one chance you have of finding the right people and finding a partner eventually. But by now you should know that that's an illusion. If it worked like that, it would have worked already. So I highly recommend people to get off of social media, especially Indian men who struggle with these kinds of inferiority issues, because that is where the perception that their race matters is really born and amplified. So let's get to the third part of the solution, and that's what I call setting the standard. And here the idea is that being Indian, the Indian identity is actually not something static. It's not something that's out there, that's like on the other side of the world and it's far away now and you have to just represent it well. No, you are not representing India, you are India. You lead India. You can lead India. And you can bring a new India into the world. It's up to you. India is what you and me end up doing, right? It's a very dynamic construct. And what you can do is to be aware of all the issues that the Indian identity brings with it that are correlated with Indianness, and then just work on improving those conditions. And so by watching a video like this, that's what you're really doing. By the way, if you like this video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Also share it with other Indian men where you feel like they might have the potential to become Indian leaders and not just Indian victims. And you might say, no, but I'm just one of a billion and my friends, they will never have an impact. It's just too small. But in the age of social media, in the age of digital information, your individual behavior, one act even, can have a huge, disproportionate impact on the world. That's why I do these videos as a one-man show in my little office here, because I know that if I hit the spot and I say something that's very new, that's very different from the rest out there, it's going to get amplified through these beautiful electrons that we're using here to communicate with each other. And this will obviously require striking a good balance, because on the one side, what it really means is you focus on the great aspects of being Indian. You focus on all the amazing achievements that the Indian civilization has brought forward, and you know that there are millions of those. And maybe a lot of uneducated people, Indians as well as Westerners, might not be aware of those. Maybe you are not that aware of those. So then the first step is to just familiarize yourself with the heritage, with the Indian culture, with the beautiful civilizatory achievements and spiritual achievements. And then once you know that, it's just a matter of reminding yourself and maybe even including that as a mantra in your daily routines, where you just say, I'm proud of being an Indian. You can just say that to yourself as long as it takes until you feel like it's your new default thinking. On the other side, what you also don't want to forget is to be aware of the shortcomings and look closely at those shortcomings that we discussed earlier, where there are certain tendencies that go along with being part of the Indian identity. But what you want to do here is to be more aware than anyone else, and then be very sure to avoid those shortcomings and actually go a bit over the top and demonstrate that you are different. I'm making another video on how exactly to do that, how to differentiate yourself as an Indian man abroad. I'll link it once it's done. And it's not fair because, yeah, the world is not fair, life is not fair, and many other people will not have to do that, but you have these stereotypes to fight against. But you can see that as an additional source of motivation, in fact. So it's in your own advantage, and you can see it as something that's for your own benefit ultimately, that you have to do more than others to show that you don't actually conform to the stereotypes that are being brought against your group. Let's summarize. If you are suffering from inferiority complex as an Indian man in the West, you should be aware and critical of the problematic tendencies in Indian culture. But you should not be ashamed of being an Indian. You must not let one narrowly defined group identity make you feel like that group identity dictates your behavior. And you must see racism for what it is, a very ridiculous and actually quite rare tendency in people, and it's not necessary to be afraid of that all the time. And then lastly, you want to demonstrate that these stereotypes that are being brought up against Indian men are just that, stereotypes. You can prove that one action at a time that just doesn't conform, obviously, with those stereotypes. This whole thing is a personal development minefield, and it was not easy for me also to express these ideas. I can totally understand if you need some help navigating this, and that's why I include a link below the video where you can schedule a one-on-one call with me where we can go much deeper into your specific needs and experiences around this topic. Thanks for watching. Samgachadvam. Namaskar.